it was very much about what happens to the other people in a crime story that is not normally covered in podcasts and that kind of thing. Lily Brown's husband, she's been married. They have a 10-year-old son. Maybe he's 12. My memory's terrible. I'm sorry. So as she finds out when her son is about 4 years old that her husband is living a false life. He's a criminal. He's been stealing money from local businesses. They live in a small town, so it's not something you can really get away from. And so that all happens. That's all part of the backstory that I could go on for a half an hour about. And when the book picks up, it seems as though her husband is back in town and harassing her and trying to get in touch with their son, which she very much does not want. And then there's some other creepy stuff going on. But this was my first time really writing a story that was centered around a woman and her child. I've never been the type to write, stories with children, whether it was romance or suspense. And actually in this book, one of the point of views is of the son. So that was a whole different level of vulnerability and fear and conflicting feelings about this dad that he loves because it's his dad, but who's a criminal. So yeah, that was one of my favorite books to write, actually. Came up with the whole idea for this story because we were out for a walk one day and we walked past a storage facility, and I realized there was like a children's play set outside and a sprinkler or something. And I looked into it, and most storage facilities, not all, but they have an on-site manager who's there 24 hours a day and lives in an apartment. And, looking into it, it's normally like a 2-bedroom apartment. So people can, live there with their families. And I just thought, what would that be like for a kid to grow up in a storage facility in a business park, the outskirts of town? It's busy during the day with a lot of strangers. And then at night, it's totally deserted except for you and your family. And I just thought, this is a really creepy setting for a suspense. I was writing this during COVID. It was sort of past the lockdowns, but definitely not when I would want to go breathe really hard in a small gym with a bunch of people. So I watched a lot of videos. My brother-in-law actually does boxing for exercise. So I talked to him a little bit. But for me, it was really about these three to five. Part of it's mysterious, but very, very different women from very different backgrounds, different race, different sexual orientation, and just each of them has something bad that is going on in their life. Somebody is doing something bad to them, but it's not something that is illegal. It's not something they can go to the police about. One of them is a woman who's, finds out her husband has been cheating on her, and she's been kept very, very, it's a very conservative religious family. So it's like she's held all these ideals, and then she finds out her husband is not holding himself to the same ideals. Another one is a woman who is facing some serious discrimination and retaliatory stuff at work. Another is a woman who has been the victim of revenge porn, and there's no proof about who did it, but she knows who it was. So it was just this, like, it's very much like Strangers on a Train. Like, how can these women help each other without having any evidence of their connection? And so it had to be a connection like that where they're not really friends, but they just happen to go to the same boxing class for exercise. Follow Her Down is the story of Elise Rockwood, who at age 35 is finally growing up and getting her life together. That's not quite how she would put it, but I'll be PG here. And she, at age 35, moves back to her hometown that she left when she was 18. And she has never returned because this small town in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California is where her teenage sister went missing and was murdered. So Elise was only 10 at the time. Her sister was 18. They didn't find out what happened to her for 10 years. So, this town is full of demons for her, but she finally realizes if she's going to heal, she needs to go back and face this. One of the theories of writing is that like you have to think of the worst thing that you could throw at this person and then throw it at them, right? So she's been back in town for a couple of years, long enough to have an ill-advised affair with a married man, long enough to finally realize she has got to stop drinking. She has to get healthy and get her mind right. And then the ex-boyfriend turns up dead and the police are at her door because she was one of the last people he reached out to before he died. His body is found in the same river where her sister was murdered. So they're kind of curious about that. And she has a brother who has never left town, and he's a big conspiracy theory guy. And he starts connecting their sister's murder with her ex-lover's murder. She doesn't believe it at first, but then things start lining up and more clues drop, and it's starting to look like he's right, that it is a connected conspiracy. I definitely did a lot of reading and a lot of listening to podcasts about conspiracy theorists, which unfortunately there's a lot of information out there right now. And also, like, for him, it started out with things like Bigfoot when he was young. And then when his sister went missing, obviously that sort of puts that kind of thinking into overdrive, like what could possibly have happened, who could be involved. So part of it was fun for me because, I mean, I was totally into cryptids as a kid, the Bigfoot stuff, all of that, I loved it. I still love it. I have come to the point now where I think if Bigfoot were real, everybody's carrying cameras around in their phone 24 hours a day. Now there'd probably be some video. So I'm starting to let that kind of thing go. But more than that, how people who believe in conspiracy theories think, how they see the world, how those kind of things get reinforced or broken down for them. So yeah, it was a lot of interesting research. For me, it was sort of interesting to build a conspiracy theorist character who believes he's sort of above conspiracy theorists. He calls himself a conspiracy realist. And he thinks that a lot of, the average sort of conspiracies are just meant to keep the masses distracted, So there was it was interesting to figure out what that personality would be. And for him, it was a guy who had a traumatic past, a lot of questions that never got answered about bad things that have happened in his life. He's never left his hometown, and he is a computer geek, so he's online all the time. But I did not want to set him up as somebody that was unlikable either. It's her brother who she loves, and she sort of blows off his theories and gets angry, doesn't want to talk about it, but things do start coming together. And sometimes, conspiracies are real. So how do you figure out what's paranoia and what is a real fact of things that are going on? Part of that, I don't often write. For me, I love isolating people and putting them into bad situations. So I'm often writing only children or people that don't have a relationship with their family. But for me, I needed them to be close. And also my brother died last year. So, that was, I wasn't close to him, but so it was a lot of thinking about those kind of relationships and those kind of sibling relationships that may be great or not so great or whatever, but they're still harken so far back in your life that, it's an important relationship. I'm actually just finishing up my next book, which will be my 10th suspense. So that one is, the working title is Bald-Faced Liar, but I have no idea if that will hold. But Jane Doe was actually the working title for that book, and it just stuck. So I'm a little hopeful that this one might stick. I oftentimes don't have a title for a book, and then I depend on my publisher to give me an idea. So that one's called Bald-Faced Liar, and it's the story of a woman who, again, has a very deep past involving this satanic panic in the 80s and 90s, which I'm sure we're both very familiar with. So again, for me, it was this, like, what happened to those kids that were involved in those trials and encouraged to make up stories about things that had never happened to them. And I'm sure a lot of those kids were fed those stories, and then it was like it did happen to them, right? I mean, they're just little kids, and you're telling them, you saw Satan, you saw whatever. So I find that extremely fascinating. What happened to those kids? So this is a woman who had that experience and moved on from there, but now she doesn't trust anybody, and she sort of just makes up little vignettes about her life, little lies about who she is and where she comes from, because she doesn't want anybody to know the real her. She doesn't feel like she can trust people to know her, or even for herself to know, to trust her own memories.